Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD tonight. This is a webinar where we talk about Lyme disease. No two webinars are ever the same because you create them each week with your questions. So the way that you participate in the webinar is to write questions. And the way you can do that is over here on the bottom side, the right-hand side of the screen down there at the bottom, is a chat box. And you can write your questions to me through that chat box, okay? I asked you to try to write your questions briefly. If you start getting them too long, it's going to be impossible for me to show them to the screen and to the participants in tonight's webinar because it actually can freeze my computer up. All right, so shorter questions work better in this format. During the webinar tonight, I am creating a recording. And tomorrow morning, somewhere around 9 to 9:30 a.m. Seattle time, I'll be sending out an email that will have links to that. So if you happen to miss some of the information tonight, just realize that I will have it recorded and you can come back and listen to it again, okay? Let's see here. I don't think. So I think there was one other thing I wanted to say, but oh, I know. During the webinar, I'll be reading your questions out loud. I also post them for the live participants. I actually post them on my screen so you can actually see them, okay? But in the recorded version, the questions that are the questions that I post for the live attendees do not show up. So I'm going to be reading these questions as well too, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. We'll take the first question. All right, so this first question is from Santiago. It says, hi, Dr. Ross, I'm positive for Babesia, Bartonella, also had SIBO in the past, currently getting tested for it again. I'm positive for Candida. I've been treated, but I have reactions to medications having to stop, like azithromycin. I can tolerate Malarone. I have a lot of digestion issues, gas, etc. The main symptoms are weight loss, fatigue, balance, twitches, panic, and ringing ears. What do you recommend treating first? Oh. So if I've got somebody in my practice that has had, is a very reactive person, and they have signs of intestinal yeast, I'm usually going to treat to clear out the intestinal yeast first, okay? So let me just talk about that briefly. So one of the things when you, so all of us have good bacteria and yeast that live in the intestines. If yeast grow too much, they can give you a lot of that gassiness and bloating that you're describing, all right? But also, if they grow too much, there can be a reaction by the immune system cells that line the intestines against those yeast. And there's a couple things that can happen. Number one, those immune cells, in trying to get rid of yeast and take care of yeast, are going to manufacture a group of inflammation chemicals called cytokines. And many of you are probably familiar with watching my webinars. I talk about cytokines a lot, okay? And the reason I talk about cytokines a lot is if you have too many cytokines in you, that's what gives you your Lyme symptoms. So when the immune system is trying to get Lyme under control, white blood cells will manufacture a group of chemicals called cytokines. And cytokines are good and bad. On the good side, they turn the immune system on to fight the infection or to treat yeast or to remove mold toxins if you should have mold toxins, for instance, okay? But in all of those conditions, if the immune system is not doing a good job, it's going to try harder and harder, and eventually it's going to manufacture too many cytokines. And cytokines in excess, too many cytokines, make it so you can't think, give you fatigue, make you hurt all over, can interfere with hormonal function. I mean, you got the idea. What we call Lyme disease symptoms are really too many yeast symptoms, okay? I'm sorry, too many cytokine symptoms, all right. Now, if you have yeast in your intestines, and they're there, they're also going to be contributing to having too many cytokines. So I don't want to make a yeast problem worse by putting somebody on antibiotics right away. I want to try to get those yeast out, because if I put a person on antibiotics that already has too many yeast going on, that's going to make the cytokine problem even worse, all right? All right, so that's one reason to clear yeast first. Second reason to clear yeast first, especially in somebody that is really reactive, is when you have those yeast in the intestines, in addition to white blood cells that see them that produce cytokines, there's another kind of white blood cell that lines the intestinal tract called mast cells. Mast cells are the cells that are involved in allergic reactions. And so if the mast cells are turned on, they're going to manufacture a lot of histamines, and those histamines are going to get into the body, and they're going to basically be more easily triggered. All of your mast cells are going to become more easily triggered by having the yeast tickling those mast cells. All right. So that mast cells, when they get activated, is a way that we can become reactive to medicine. So I'd like to get yeast under control also to decrease that mast cell reactivity. All right. So in your kind of a situation, probably even before I would deal with the Bartonella, or I would deal with the Babesia, or even deal with the Lyme, I would want to do some things to stabilize, number one, cytokines. So I'd probably put you on curcumin, a liposomal variety of curcumin, and I would do that as a 500 milligram pill 3 times a day. The product I like for that is a product by Thorne called Mariva 500. It's a liposomal curcumin that helps increase the absorption of curcumin. Curcumin gets inside of white blood cells and can block cytokine production, okay? So first thing, stabilize your white blood cells so not making as many cytokines. And then in addition, I would want to do things to start killing yeast, okay? So I'd have you take something called nystatin, and that's a 500,000 international unit pill, 2 pills twice a day. And I might couple that with diflucan, 200 milligrams, 1 pill a day for 30 days. Okay. That works about 90% of the time. The other way you could do it is, instead of using those 2 things, you could do an herbal anti-yeast medication. I like things in my yeast medications. You like using combinations. So things like caprylic acid, pau d'arco, grapefruit seed extract, garlic, oregano oil, thyme oil, all those things mixed in a pill can be very useful at getting rid of yeast. And that would be to use 2 pills twice a day. But that's probably going to take about 2 months, and it works about 80% of the time. So your prescription option is better, okay? The other thing I would do in a situation like this would be to get you on a good probiotic. And I would probably want to use one that does not have a lot of prebiotic fiber. Prebiotic fibers actually support the bacteria in your probiotic. And so I would probably use something called Core Biotic Sensitive, which is manufactured by a company called Research Nutritionals. It's soil-based probiotics, but there's no additional fiber added to the pill. And it's that fiber that can kind of sometimes increase that gassiness and bloating, okay? And that Core Biotic Sensitive, I would use as 2 pills 1 time a day, okay? So that's probably how I would start to address this to begin with, okay? Bear with me here a minute, everyone. I don't care for my setup with my computer here tonight. Just a minute, I got to change it. Hold on here. Work a little bit better. So everyone may notice I've got a little bit of a different setup here tonight. I'm working remotely from my office, and I'm using my laptop instead of my regular desktop computer, and it's changed the whole dynamics of where the camera sits and everything else. So I'm having to readjust there. I think this is going to work out a little bit better. All right. So anyhow, Santiago, I hope that answers your question. And so, yeah, it's an issue of how you prioritize things. But in somebody that's sensitive or has too many yeast, I like to go after the yeast first. Okay. All right. Thanks for that question. Good luck to you. All right. Let's see. This next question is from Kara. Hello, Dr. Ross. As someone with compromised immune system, I get concerned when I hear rumors of mandatory COVID vaccines coming up. Can you speak about effects of vaccines on those immune compromised or with neurological symptoms? I've been watching a 9-part documentary series called The Truth About Vaccines this week about corruption in that industry. If you get a chance to see it, here is the link. Thank you for sharing that link. I'll take a look at that later. So the truth is about vaccines and COVID-19 and Lyme. I don't know. I have no idea. And so, but let me tell you what I do know about vaccines, okay? So there are some vaccines, when we give them to the person with Lyme, that will cause Lyme to get more active. So for instance, and during flu season, I am not a big advocate of people with Lyme getting flu vaccine. Okay. And the reason I'm not a big advocate is I have seen numerous times where somebody that has Lyme that seems to be in pretty good shape, we give them flu vaccine, and then suddenly their Lyme is a lot worse. Okay. So with the flu vaccine specifically, we can see some immune suppression that sets in that makes it more possible for the Lyme germ to get active. Okay. That's the flu vaccine. There's other vaccines that I will advise that my patients that have Lyme get, like getting a tetanus vaccine, that I don't see that they tend to get worse when they get the tetanus vaccine. I just don't. So the issue is that, yes, some vaccines may cause Lyme and Lyme-related conditions like neuropathy to get worse, but that does not mean all of them do it, all right? And I have no idea what the ramifications are going to be from people using the new COVID-19 vaccine, because we really don't even know what it's going to be made up of yet. We don't know what it's going to do to the immune system specifically. There's just a lot of unknowns here. So anything I could suggest would be pure speculation. Okay? All right. Thanks for that question, Kara. And good luck to you. Hello, Byron. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Hope you are staying safe. I am. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm working remotely. So for this next month up through Memorial Day weekend, I'm actually seeing everyone by telemedicine. I'm not going in to the office to do that. Let's see. How common is it for Lyme patients to get carditis or heart issues? And what are usually the key symptoms that would suggest this? Also, can it return after an antibiotic treatment? Will your herbal protocol effectively support treatment for Lyme patients with heart issues? All right, so carditis means inflammation of the heart, okay? And the way so symptoms that can suggest inflammation of the heart would be chest pain, okay? That's a very common thing to have with carditis. The other kind of problem that people with Lyme can get into, sometimes Lyme can infect, I guess, what I would call the electrical conduction system of the heart and lead to heart rhythm problems. So you'll feel your heart skipping around, or you might feel it racing really fast. Those would be other symptoms that might make you think of whether you've got a heart problem. To know for sure if you have a heart problem, you're going to have to see a doctor that's going to hook you up to an EKG machine. Okay. Now, on an EKG machine, we can actually see changes that suggest to us that a person is having pericarditis or carditis. We will see changes on an EKG that can tell us that. We can also see changes on an EKG, on that electrical pattern of the heart, that tells us that a person is having heart block, electrical conduction changes. Okay, so those are the big things that can happen from having Lyme. Now, typically, when you have a carditis, because of that being such a critical organ to the body, when somebody has a carditis, generally we're going to want to start treatments by having a person on IV antibiotics. That's going to be the strongest way to go after a carditis. And so that would be to use something called Rocephin, also known as ceftriaxone. So that's IV antibiotics, okay? And once the person's heart, the acute inflammation is stabilized, and once the acute heart arrhythmia or electrical pattern blockage is reversed, then we might consider going to either oral or herbal antibiotics. So I do think herbal antibiotics would be okay, but only after somebody has first started with doing IV antibiotics in this particular kind of a situation, okay? But again, the only way to really know if you have heart block or if you have carditis is you got to get an EKG. You cannot make that decision just based on symptoms alone. The reason you can't make it based on symptoms alone is also muscles that get inflamed here in your muscles that get inflamed from having Lyme can give you chest pain. So don't assume all chest pain means it's your heart. Okay, so you got to be careful with that. All right. Okay. Thanks for that question, and good luck to you, Byron. All right. Hi, Cindy. Let's see. I have noticed an oddity in my antibody test, and I'm wondering if it might be useful commentary on the status of my immune system. I have tested positive for multiple tick-borne pathogens in the past. However, I have noticed that once the infection has been successfully treated to the best of my doctor's ability, there is no longer even a positive IgG result for the antibodies, something that goes against prevailing medical wisdom. When the infection makes a comeback, the IgG titer becomes positive again, but not the IgM, leading most to believe that this is simply indicative of my having had it previously. Yet, as it had been completely negative during the interim, I think that would be unlikely. Any wisdom? So so everyone, IgG antibodies. So when we get infections, there's actually two families of antibodies that we generally can develop. One is called IgM. The other family of antibodies are called IgG antibodies, okay? IgMs generally are the antibodies or not generally. IgMs are always the antibodies that we develop acutely. They're the first antibodies that are developed. And in all infections, they're supposed to, notice the word supposed to, in all infections, they're supposed to go away usually by 6 weeks to 3 months, and then they get replaced by IgG antibodies, all right? Now, once you make IgG antibodies, they serve as the memory of the immune system, and they are not supposed to go away, okay? Now, one thing about IgMs, we actually know, based upon information from the National Institutes of Health studies looking at whether IV antibody or whether a longer-term antibiotic treatments for Lyme works or not. And those studies were all full of various problems in answering that question. But one of the things we learned from their studies, we can look at the data from those studies, and we can tell that about 40 to 50% of people that have chronic Lyme still test positive for IgM antibodies, even though they're not supposed to be there. Okay, so that seems to happen about 40 to 50% of the time. We're not clear why it happens. We do know it happens, but we're not sure why it happens. Okay, so a lot of doctors automatically think that when IgMs are there, it means an acute infection. That's not necessarily so in Lyme. Okay, right. Second thing about IgG antibodies, we don't have enough studies to tell us what happens in all people with Lyme with their IgGs. There are some of my colleagues that believe that when you get better with Lyme, when the immune system has it under control, that IgG antibodies should go down. There are some of my colleagues that believe that. Notice how I said the word believe, okay? And they think that that is a standard they should apply to all Lyme patients, all right? All right. But to be honest, the only way we could believe that that is the situation, or that is a truth that should happen in all people with Lyme, is we would need to do large studies, like thousands of people kind of studies, and see what happens when people start becoming asymptomatic with Lyme. Do all of their IgGs go down to normal? No one's done those studies, okay? So it could be the fact that your IgGs go to normal that is what happens in your immune system. Your immune system, when the germ is under control, stops making as many IgGs. That does not tend to be what I see with a lot of my patients. I have some of my patients that are asymptomatic, and if I go back and test their antibodies, they come back positive, okay? So I don't think we know enough. There's not been enough studies done to say that IgGs go to normal or they stay elevated. We don't know what frequency that happens with when people become asymptomatic. But in your situation, given that you now have some evidence that when your IgGs are gone, that means you're doing better, that may mean something for you, okay? But the thing I would question is how good of an indicator that is that the germ is out. Because here it is, it looks like you've had IgGs basically have gone way down, and yet you still get the illness back again. So my argument against using IgGs as a means of seeing where you are and seeing if the germ is gone is we have no test that truly proves the germ is out of you. Just because IgGs are gone may mean that the germ has gone into hiding. Lyme likes to hide in tissues that don't have good blood flow. So you may not make IgGs. They can't see it, okay? The other thing that could be happening is we now know that Lyme has the ability to turn into what are called persister forms, okay? And what happens with persisters is they're forms of so traditionally, we always believed Lyme existed in two forms, something called a spirochete. That's the corkscrew looking thing you've seen on the internet before, okay? And we also have seen that Lyme exist as something called cyst forms of the germ, microscopic cyst forms of the germ, all right? We now know, based upon research from about 4 years ago and ongoing research that keeps coming out more and more now, that tells us that Lyme spirochetes and Lyme cyst have the ability to slow their metabolism way down and effectively go into hibernation. And those are what we call persister forms of the germ. So the small amount of spirochetes and the small amount of cyst that go into these persister forms, when they're in a persister form, ignore antibiotics. They don't care. They don't pay attention to them. The antibiotics don't work on them, okay? I have no science that tells me, though, do persister forms cause IgG elevations, or because they're in these persister states, does the immune system even stop making antibodies against those persister forms? We don't know. No one's done the research on that, okay? So the fact that you're telling me that when you get your IgGs, that they get better and you feel better, and yet you get symptoms back again and again, would suggest to me that it's your IgGs are not being gone are not any proof that the germ is out of you. It would suggest to me the germ is still in you. And that's the argument I have against a lot of my colleagues who tend to use IgG testing, antibody level testing, as a means of deciding if they're going to stop treatment. I would argue we don't have anything that proves a germ is out of a person at this point. Okay? All right. Thanks for the question, Cindy, and thanks for your observation there too. All right. Hold on here a minute, everyone. Just want to make sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this next question is from Stuart. And Stuart says, "Hi, Dr. Ross. I have Lyme and have contracted COVID-19. Had the virus for a few weeks now and feel like crap. I'm considering going on a keto diet with intermittent fasting, 18 to 6 hours. In your opinion, would this be beneficial, or could it make my Lyme symptoms worse?" Okay. I can't say for sure. So the only way to know if it's going to make your Lyme symptoms worse is to try it. The main thing with the kind of diet you're talking about doing, which is eating over a 6-hour period and basically not having any caloric intake in those other hours, doesn't mean you're not going to be giving your body adequate calories. I mean, those 6 hours you're eating, you're probably going to be getting adequate calories for your immune system to function, for you to function, okay? So I don't see any reason to suggest, I don't think that just on the idea of getting adequate caloric intake and adequate nutrition that it would hurt you. I also don't know that it's going to help you. I have no idea. The one thing about diets is, there's a lot of diets out there, as you all know. And there's a lot of diet fads. There's a lot of people that promote this diet for that and that diet for that. What I have learned in working with diets in my years of doing Lyme treatment and working with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia is that truly we have no one diet that is going to be right for everyone. And that ultimately all these diets have good theories as to why they work and might work, et cetera. And the only way to really know if a diet is right for you is to try it and see what happens, okay? So there is not a universal one diet that works for everyone, all right? So I don't have any problem with you trying something like this. As to whether it's going to be helpful or not, I don't know. The other thing I want to let you know is that based on reports that we're seeing is that it can take a long time to recover your energy and how you're doing after you get a COVID-19, sometimes 1 to 2 months or more. One of the reasons, again, that people can feel bad in COVID-19 is that the immune system, in reacting to get rid of the germ, manufactures a lot of cytokines, okay? All right, now we already talked about cytokines tonight. Cytokines are what give you most of your Lyme symptoms. Cytokines in excess can give you a lot of that fatigue, that kind of just terrible fatigue that people with COVID-19 are reporting afterwards. So as part of a recovery from COVID-19, I am strongly suggesting to my patients that they stay on anti-cytokine regimens. And there's a minimum of at least 2 things I recommend that they do. Number one, I think they should be on curcumin. And that Thorn Mariva 500, one pill 3 times a day is what I recommend, okay? And number 2, I give them strong recommendations that they should also be taking glutathione, okay? Glutathione is a very strong antioxidant. The way that it works is it decreases oxidizing agents, and those oxidizing agents can trigger the immune system to make cytokines. So if you lower the oxidizing agents using glutathione, that decreases the message going into the white blood cell cytokine factories. Basically, they don't get the signals to produce cytokines, so you're not going to have as great a cytokine production, okay? And then the curcumin gets inside the white blood cell cytokine factories and blocks the production line. So the glutathione that I suggest people to use is a liposomal variety. Again, just like with the curcumin, liposomal glutathione is better absorbed. It's basically glutathione that's microscopically wrapped in fat, and that wrapping it microscopically in fat increases the absorption of the glutathione, okay? And so the way that you would want to do that is to take the product I like is a research nutritionals product that has been shown in scientific studies to truly increase the levels of cytokines. Glutathione inside your white blood, inside your red blood cells, actually, is what the studies have been done. And the way to do it is to take 5 milliliters of their product called Tri-Fortify. Also comes as 2 varieties, Tri-Fortify Orange, Tri-Fortify Watermelon by Research Nutritionals. And that would be to take 5 milliliters, which is 1 teaspoon at least 1 time a day, okay? And the other thing is just time, Stuart. It just takes time to recover from this thing, okay? All right. Good luck to you. All right. Hold on there just a minute, everyone. I got to get some water in here. All right. Hi, Deborah. Let's see. Just wondering about Lyme and facial nerve pain. Thanks. Okay. So Lyme is a germ that can infect basically most tissues in the body. And one of the things that it can infect are your nerves. It can infect facial nerves. It can infect nerves throughout the body, okay? So facial nerve, the ones that kind of can get infected by Lyme, one is the facial nerve, cranial nerve number 7. It's a nerve that kind of splits off into many different places here, and it basically controls the muscles on one side of the face. So often you'll, actually on both sides, but both sides are supplied by a different nerve. So there's cranial nerve 7 on this side, there's cranial nerve 7 on this side, and if that nerve gets infected, you can get something called a Bell's palsy, which means that the muscles on that side of the face don't work correctly. And kind of the whole face just starts kind of falling off on one side. Okay. All right. So that's one thing you can get. Another thing that people can get is something called trigeminal neuralgia. There's a nerve that runs up in this area that gives you some of the sensation, and it can become infected, and it can give you just severe pain in this area and severe headaches. Okay, so those are the major 2 neuropathies you can get. But also there's other small nerves that run around the face that give you feeling and sensation. And those sometimes, if they are infected, can give you a lot of neurologic pain. And neurologic pain would have the quality of sharp, stabbing, shooting, burning, piercing, or electric. Okay, those are nerve pain. Also, if those nerves get infected, it can give you loss of feeling in various patches of the face as well, too. Okay, so the treatment is treat your germs. And with neuropathy, you always have to think about Lyme germ, but you got to think about Bartonella as a possibility. To see if you have Bartonella, you could test for it, but testing is not perfect. The reason testing is not perfect is we know there's 28 strains of Bartonella, and we see that 20 of those 28 strains, 15 can infect humans, and regular antibody testing for Bartonella germs is only good for about 4 of those strains. Okay, so you can already see what the problem is with Bartonella testing. We can't test adequately for all of these strains. Okay, so the other way to look and see if you have Bartonella as you're trying to figure out which germs to treat for your neuropathy would be to look at what we call Bartonella symptoms. And if you have enough of these, then you start thinking, maybe I should treat Bartonella based on the symptoms, okay? And so how we do that, the symptoms you consider if you have Bartonella are, do you have pain on the bottom of your feet, near the balls of the feet, that is worse in the morning and gets better as you start walking around? Okay, that's one thing. Secondly, neuropathies make you think about it. Third, Bartonella has this peculiar thing. I think it infects part of the brain called the limbic system. And when that part of the brain gets infected, it can give you the sense that you're vibrating on the inside, like you got this internal buzzing or this internal vibration, all right? Bartonella also is known for giving a lot of neuropsychiatric symptoms. And by that, I mean things like bad ongoing anxiety or depression or hallucinations, okay? Those would be things that might make you think of Bartonella. Bartonella is known for giving a type of rash known as a stretch mark or scratch mark rash as well, too, okay? And then Bartonella can give really severe cognitive thinking impairment too. So if you have a number of those things as part of your Lyme disease syndrome, then you need to think about treating Bartonella as well too, okay? All right. And then finally, when somebody's got nerve injury, in addition to treating the infections by killing them with antibiotics, herbal or prescriptions, I like to do things to repair those nerves, okay? And so the steps that I like to use to repair nerves are, number one, I'd like to be on herbal anti-inflammatories to get the inflammation down. And so that would be the Mariva 500 that I talked about already tonight a number of times, the curcumin, okay? Number two, I'd like to get people on glutathione. So glutathione, again, helps lower cytokines, but it's also a master antioxidant, and its job in the body is made in every one of our cells. And its job is to repair damaged cells, okay, from the inside of the cells. Now, the trouble is when you get a neuropathy or you get tissue injury of any kind, those tissues are going to keep working to repair themselves. And in the case of injured nerves and other areas that are injured, you may exhaust your glutathione gas tank. Those cells may become empty of glutathione. And even though they can manufacture it, they may not be able to keep up. So I like to augment that by having them on that Trifortify, that liposomal glutathione product I told you about. And sometimes I'll even go 1 teaspoon twice a day for that, okay? All right. The other thing I like to do when people have injured nerves, especially if it's not responding to at least the first month or two of antibiotics, I might start doing nerve cell membrane repair. And what I would use for that is to give them, so the membrane, the outer cell membrane of nerve cells, any cell actually, are made up of a double layer of fat. And we can do things to support that double layer of fat and to repair that double layer of fat. And I like, those are called, that's known as giving somebody phospholipids or phospholipid repair. And I like to do that as part of my nerve support protocol too. So curcumin, I already mentioned, glutathione, and then do phospholipid repair. And what I like to use for phospholipid repair, my current favorite is to use a product by Research Nutritionals, which is called ATP 360. And you wind up taking 3 pills 1 time a day. So ATP 360 is composed of those phospholipid fats that make up the covering, okay? So the way you can think about my nerve repair formula is get inflammation down, that's curcumin. Repair the nerve cells from the inside, that's glutathione. And repair the actual damaged covering, that's the ATP 360, okay? And you do 3 pills 1 time a day, all right? Okay, so I'm going to do a quick screen share here because some of you may need more information, and I just want to show you where you could go look for it later here. Okay, so this is my Lyme disease information site. This is Treat Lyme by Marty Ross MD. Many of you are familiar with it. This is where you learned about the webinars, for instance, okay? All right, so underneath this tab here is my Lyme disease treatment guide. And through here, I've answered questions probably about most kind of problems people might have in Lyme disease. I've got something probably I wrote about it, okay? Most, not everything, but most, okay? So for neuropathy, take a look at my section here called Brain and Nerves. And take a look at this article here called Neuropathy Repair, Heal That Tingling, Numbness, and Pain. And that's where I outline a lot of the steps and things that I just told you during what I just told you, okay? All right. And then in terms of how do you diagnose Bartonella, take a look again at my online Lyme guide and look over here under this tab called How to Diagnose. All right. And then you would want to take a look at this tab right here called Is it Bartonella? Okay. And through there, I talk about the problems with testing, and I talk about the symptoms that you would want to look at that make you think that it could be Bartonella. All right, let me go back here. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Deborah, and thank you for that question. Hello, Lisa. Let's see. Hi, Doc. If in remission, is it normal to get the exact same symptoms you had in the past, only when stressed? Doesn't that mean that the Lyme is still active? Is biocide, et cetera, always necessary to police the environment? And then random questions. Are vitamin patches trustworthy? Can you take high-dose vitamin C with oxalates showing up on oat testing? Okay, let me try to work through these one at a time. So, when you are stressed, one of the things that can happen with stress is things that are more neurologic related may show up. Okay, so your nervous system is highly influenced by stress, and symptoms of your Lyme disease that might have been more neurologically related may tend to come out more when you're under stress. Part of the reason for that can be that even when you're in remission from Lyme, even when the germ is no longer active in you, it's very possible that you can have ongoing tissue injury or nerve injury that is mostly in a good shape, but just a little bit that is there. And then you add the level of stress on top of it, it's enough to throw things over the top, so you start exhibiting those symptoms, okay? So that could be what's happening here, is you just have some ongoing injury that is made worse because anything nerve related will get worse when you have stress. Pain can get worse, neuropathies can get worse, tremors can get worse, etc. Okay, all right. And no, it does not necessarily mean Lyme is still active. It just may be a sign of old injury, basically. Okay. Now let's see. What's your next question? So is biocidin always necessary to police the environment? The answer is no. Not everyone needs to be on something when they're in remission or possibly cured of the illness to help police the environment to keep the germs from coming back up, okay? So for instance, if somebody has taken disulfiram and they got better on it, or they did dapsone type treatments at high doses the way that Dr. Horowitz recommends, and they got better on it, then the chances are one of those two treatments could have been enough to even knock the Lyme germ completely out of the body. In that situation, it would not necessarily be necessary that that person would have to be on something to police the environment. Okay, let's see. Are vitamin patches trustworthy? It depends on the brand. I would need to see what the brand is, and I would want to see their studies showing that they get good absorption. All right. And can one take high-dose vitamin C with oxalate showing up in oat testing? The answer is I probably would avoid it. All right. Thanks for your questions, Lisa. Good luck to you. Hello, Christine. Hold on here just a minute. What does biofilm look like? So biofilms, you can see under the microscope. When we talk about biofilms, these are not things that you're going to see visibly with your eye, if that's what you're wondering about, okay? And when you look under the microscope, you can see kind of this gelatinous slime layer that covers the germs. All right. And what biofilms are, they're actually really complex structures. They are made up, there's two major components. One of the major components is a mucopolysaccharide. So kind of think of it as a sugar slime. Okay. And that is held together by a protein skeleton structure made up of proteins that are involved in blood clotting. Okay, so fibrinogen is turned into something called fibrin, and that's a blood clotting protein, but they're recruited into these biofilms to help give the biofilm structure to hold those mucopolysaccharides together. Okay, now also within these biofilms are just tons of different kind of bacteria. Lyme can live in them, but other bacteria can live there. And you can kind of think of this, there's like a whole social structure within these where certain bacteria perform certain roles. And you can kind of think of those communities. It's like there's the post office, there's the town hall, there's different germs in there that are organized to do different things. All right. There are channels and tubules through which nutrients can be taken in and garbage can be thrown out. All right. They're really, really complex structures. So anyhow, those are just some thoughts. So, but you have to see it under the microscope. Okay. All right. Thanks for that question, Christine. Good luck to you. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Let's see. It's Barbara from Bowler, Texas. Hi, Barbara. I think there may be more to your question here. Let's see. See, you helped me out of my cytokine storm. I'm glad to know that. I hope some of the advice that I gave you about cytokines was helpful for that. I want to see if there's even another part to your question. Nope, that was it. Thank you. Thank you for thank you for letting me know that. I'm glad to have helped. I'm glad to have helped. All right, everyone, I'm going to say something about that. All right. So for those of you that may not have participated before when Barbara asked some of her questions about that. So the reason that people get bad, we think one of the main reasons that people get bad with COVID-19 is we think that they eventually develop their immune system overproduces cytokines, and we call that a cytokine storm. In Lyme disease, as I said, the reason you feel badly is that the immune system makes too many cytokines. And when the immune system sees a bunch of dead bug parts because we start killing them, we call that cytokine storm that develops, we call that a Herxheimer reaction. Okay. So this cytokine storm you're reading about and people with COVID-19, the reason they get bad, we've known about that for a long time in Lyme. We call that a Herxheimer reaction. Okay. So what happens in a Herxheimer reaction is your immune system sees dead bug parts and toxins that get released from the inside of those germs and reacts by making more cytokines than they normally would. And that huge cytokine surge that some people can get is a cytokine storm. So they're going to get more fatigue. They're going to get confused maybe. They may hurt all over. In an extreme way, they can actually get high temperatures, for instance, too. Okay. So the things I like to use to deal with cytokine storm and cytokines is glutathione. I talked about that earlier tonight. If you're really having a strong cytokine storm or cytokine surge, do the glutathione 5 milliliters twice a day. Be on the curcumin I talked about, 500 milligrams of that at least 3 times a day. If it's really bad, you can even go up to 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day. I also like to add to that quercetin sometimes, which also works in its own way to decrease those cytokines being produced, but also can knock down excess histamines if they're being made by your mast cells too. And that would be to do 500 milligrams 3 times a day. Okay. So those are some of the basic steps that I take to deal with excess cytokines. All right. If you want to read more about it, let me just do a quick screen share on that. All right. So this is back in my online Lyme guide. If you want to know more about cytokines and steps you can take to lower them, take a look at my section here called Herxheimer and Cytokines. You could either read this article called Control Cytokines, a guide to fix the Lyme symptoms and the immune system, or you can look at my other article here called Herxheimer die-off reaction, inflammation run amok. Okay, there's similar information in both these articles, but again, it talks about what do excess cytokines do and what can you do to limit them. Okay. All right. Thanks for the question. Hello, Geraldine. Let's see. I'm on herbal program of cat's claw and banderol after 11 weeks of antibiotics. My symptoms seem to be diminishing, but wondering if they were completely go away or always there to some degree. Does the bacteria cause damage that causes permanent symptoms like jaw, neck, shoulder, and back pain? So the answer is yes and maybe and yes. All right, I'm not trying to be facetious, but let me try to explain what I mean by that. So it is possible when you have Lyme that some of the symptoms you have are the result of permanent injury if you have been adequately treated. And that's the hard part to tell is when do you know that you have been adequately treated? Okay. So, and then we also know that Lyme in some people can take a long time to get the germ load under control. So, for instance, I tell my patients with chronic Lyme that have never been treated before that they can expect anywhere from 1 to 2 years of being on herbal or prescription antibiotics to get well on average. That's on average. Okay. I also tell my patients when they first come to see me that probably about 80 to 85% of people that I work with will get some degree of improvement. But those improvements may range anywhere from 5% up to 100%.